What happens when one of Britain's most respected actresses sits down for what should be a simple morning chat and ends up walking off set in disgust? It only took 37 seconds of pure arrogance from a talk show host to destroy her own reputation and send shock waves through the television industry. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios. Helen Mirren had agreed to appear on the popular breakfast show to discuss her latest project, a passion piece about women's rights that had taken her years to develop. She arrived early, polite as always, chatting warmly with the makeup team and production crew. Everyone could see she was genuinely excited to talk about something so close to her heart. Lorraine Kelly, meanwhile, was having what those close to the show would later describe as one of her more difficult mornings. The ratings had been slipping, and pressure from network executives was mounting. She needed something, anything, to create a buzz and get people talking about her show again. The interview began pleasantly enough. Helen settled into the bright orange sofa, her usual gracious smile lighting up the studio. The cameras rolled and Lorraine launched into her introduction with that familiar Scottish lilt that had made her a household name. Good morning, everyone, and what a treat we have for you today. The absolutely magnificent Helen Mirren is here with us to talk about her new project. Helen, lovely to see you as always. Helen nodded warmly. Thank you for having me, Lorraine. I'm thrilled to be here. Now, this new film of yours, Lorraine continued, glancing down at her notes. It's quite the serious piece, isn't it? All about women's struggles and whatnot. Tell me, don't you think audiences are getting a bit tired of all this heavy feminist messaging? I mean, haven't we moved past all that by now? The question hung in the air like a lead balloon. Helen's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure with the professionalism that had defined her decades-long career. Well, Lorraine, I wouldn't call it messaging so much as storytelling. These are real women's experiences, and I think there's tremendous value in bringing their voices to light. The statistics show that many of the issues we explore in the film are still very much relevant today. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, a dismissive laugh escaping her lips. Statistics, yes, but surely you must admit that some women today are just looking for things to complain about. I mean, look at you. You've had a fantastic career, made millions, won awards. Isn't your success proof that all this talk about inequality is a bit overdone? The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Even the camera operator seemed to tense up. Helen's eyebrows raised slightly, and she took a measured breath before responding. I think that's a rather simplistic way to look at it, Lorraine. My success doesn't negate the experiences of countless other women who haven't had the same opportunities or faced different challenges. Just because one person succeeds doesn't mean the system is working for everyone. But surely, Lorraine pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension, you can't deny that women today have it easier than ever before. I mean, we're sitting here, two successful women in television, talking to millions of viewers. What more do women want? Helen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those who knew her well would have recognized the warning signs, but Lorraine seemed determined to push forward with her line of questioning. What women want, Lorraine, is equality of opportunity, safety, and respect. These aren't unreasonable demands, and they're certainly not things we should stop fighting for just because some of us have been fortunate. Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. Oh, come on, Helen. Don't you think all this victim mentality is getting a bit old? I've worked my way up in this industry without needing to blame men or society for my problems. Maybe if more women focused on working harder instead of complaining, they'd get further. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Helen's expression shifted from diplomatic patience to barely contained incredulity. She sat forward slightly, her voice taking on a steelier quality. I'm sorry, Lorraine, but I find that perspective deeply troubling. Are you suggesting that women who face discrimination or harassment are simply not working hard enough? That victims of workplace inequality are just making excuses? I'm saying, Lorraine replied with a shrug that suggested she thought the matter was settled, that successful women like us should be encouraging other women to take personal responsibility rather than always looking for someone else to blame. The camera captured every micro-expression on Helen's face as she processed what she had just heard. Her decades of training as an actress couldn't hide the genuine shock and disappointment that flickered across her features. Personal responsibility, Helen repeated slowly, as if testing the words. So, when a woman is passed over for promotion despite being more qualified, that's her fault for not taking personal responsibility? When she's subjected to inappropriate comments or behavior in the workplace, she should just work harder. Lorraine seemed to realize she had ventured into dangerous territory. But rather than backing down, she doubled down. Look, Helen, I'm not saying harassment is okay, but we can't keep using these isolated incidents to paint all men as villains or pretend that every woman who doesn't succeed is a victim of some grand conspiracy. Isolated incidents? Helen's voice rose slightly for the first time. Lorraine, the research shows that the vast majority of women have experienced some form of workplace discrimination or harassment. These aren't isolated incidents. They're systemic problems that require acknowledgement and action, not dismissal. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Production assistants were glancing nervously at each other, unsure whether to intervene. Lorraine, however, seemed energized by the conflict. Research, statistics, studies, she said with another dismissive wave. You can make numbers say anything you want, can't you? The reality is that women today have more opportunities than any generation before them. Maybe instead of constantly focusing on what's wrong, we should be celebrating how far we've come. Helen sat back in her chair, and for a moment, the studio was completely silent except for the low hum of the cameras. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute conviction. Celebrating progress doesn't mean ignoring ongoing problems, Lorraine. And dismissing other women's experiences because they don't match your own isn't just wrong, it's harmful. Lorraine's face flushed slightly at the rebuke. But instead of taking a moment to reconsider her approach, she seemed to interpret Helen's measured criticism as a personal attack. The professional mask she usually wore for the cameras began to slip, revealing something uglier underneath. Harmful. Lorraine let out a sharp laugh that echoed uncomfortably through the studio. What's harmful is filling young women's heads with the idea that they're victims before they've even tried to succeed. What's harmful is teaching them to see sexism in every boardroom and harassment in every conversation. Helen's composure remained intact, but those watching could see her hands clasped more tightly in her lap. I'm not suggesting we see problems where they don't exist, Lorraine. I'm saying we shouldn't ignore them where they do exist. There's a significant difference. Is there, though? Lorraine shot back, her voice taking on a more aggressive tone. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're part of an industry that's made victimhood fashionable. Everyone wants to be oppressed these days because it gets you sympathy, attention, maybe even awards. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Even the most seasoned television professionals in the studio couldn't believe what they were hearing. A prominent talk show host was essentially accusing one of Britain's most respected actresses of exploiting victimhood for personal gain. Helen's reaction was swift and surgical. That is an extraordinary thing to say, Lorraine. Are you suggesting that women who speak about discrimination are lying for attention? I'm suggesting, Lorraine continued, seemingly unaware of the hole she was digging for herself, that there's a whole industry built around professional victimhood. Look at Hollywood. Look at the media. Look at politics. The more oppressed you can claim to be, the more moral authority you're given. So, when women come forward about workplace harassment, Helen said, her voice growing colder, you believe they're motivated by a desire for moral authority rather than a need for justice? Lorraine shifted in her seat, but her expression remained defiant. I believe that some women have learned they can get what they want by playing the victim card rather than earning it through merit. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen stared at Lorraine for a long moment, and viewers could practically see her reassessing everything she thought she knew about the person sitting across from her. The victim card, Helen repeated slowly. That's what you call it when women seek accountability for misconduct. Look, Helen, Lorraine said, leaning forward with the condescending tone one might use with a particularly slow child. You're obviously passionate about this cause, and that's admirable in its way. But surely even you can admit that some women have gone too far with all this, that some accusations are exaggerated or even false. Helen's eyes flashed with something that made the camera operators instinctively zoom in slightly. Some accusations may indeed be false, Lorraine, just as some accusations of any crime may be false. But using that possibility to dismiss or minimize the experiences of genuine victims is both illogical and cruel. Cruel? Lorraine laughed again, and the sound was becoming increasingly grating. What's cruel is ruining men's careers and reputations based on accusations that may or may not be true. What's cruel is creating an environment where men are afraid to mentor women, or even be alone in a room with them, because one misunderstanding could destroy their lives. The mask was completely off now. Helen could see exactly who she was dealing with, and her response carried the full weight of her moral authority. If men are afraid to be alone with women because they might accidentally engage in harassment, Lorraine, then perhaps they need to examine their own behavior rather than blaming women for speaking up about misconduct. Lorraine's face was now visibly red, and her voice rose to match her frustration. That's exactly the kind of attitude I'm talking about. You're basically saying that all men are potential harassers and that women should be believed without question, no matter what they claim happened. I'm saying nothing of the sort, Helen replied with icy precision. I'm saying that when women report misconduct, they deserve to be taken seriously and have their claims properly investigated. That's not the same as believing everyone without question. And it's certainly not the same as assuming all men are guilty. But that's the effect, isn't it? Lorraine pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was destroying her own credibility with every word. Men are guilty until proven innocent now. Their lives and careers can be destroyed by a single accusation, while the accusers face no consequences, even when they're proven wrong. Helen's patience, legendary though it was, had clearly reached its breaking point. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet fury far more intimidating than any shouting match. Lorraine, the statistics show that false accusations of harassment and assault are extremely rare, while underreporting of genuine incidents is epidemic. Your characterization of the situation is not only inaccurate, but actively harmful to victims who are already afraid to come forward. Statistics again, Lorraine said with a dismissive snort. You know what I think, Helen? I think you've been in Hollywood so long that you've lost touch with how normal women think and feel. Not everyone wants to be a professional victim like some of these actresses who suddenly remember being assaulted 20 years later, right when their careers need a boost. The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. Production assistants froze in place. The comment was so shockingly inappropriate, so obviously crossing every line of decency that for a moment, no one seemed to know how to react. Helen's response, when it came, was delivered with the kind of controlled fury that only a truly great actress could muster. That is absolutely disgusting, Lorraine. You're suggesting that women who come forward about assault are lying for career advancement. That's not just wrong, it's vile. But Lorraine, perhaps sensing that she had gone too far but unwilling to back down, decided to double down once more. I'm saying that timing is everything, Helen. And when these stories conveniently surface just when someone needs publicity or relevance, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? The words hit Helen like a physical slap. For 37 seconds, she simply stared at Lorraine in complete disbelief, her face cycling through shock, disgust, and finally cold determination. The entire studio held its breath as Britain's most beloved actress processed what had just been said to her. When Helen finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more power than any shout could have mustered. You are suggesting that women who have been sexually assaulted are fabricating their trauma for publicity. Do you understand what you just said, Lorraine? Lorraine, perhaps finally recognizing the magnitude of her mistake, attempted to backtrack. Now, Helen, I didn't say all women. I just meant that some cases seem suspiciously timed and... Stop. The single word cut through Lorraine's rambling like a blade. Helen held up one hand, her eyes never leaving Lorraine's face. Just stop talking for a moment and listen to yourself. You are sitting on national television suggesting that assault victims are liars and opportunists. The color had drained from Lorraine's face, but her stubborn pride prevented her from backing down completely. I think we need to be able to have honest conversations about these issues without being accused of victim blaming every time we ask reasonable questions. Reasonable questions? Helen's voice rose for the first time, and the raw emotion in it made everyone in the studio flinch. You just implied that women fabricate sexual assault for career benefits. There is nothing reasonable about that statement, Lorraine. It's reprehensible. I think you're overreacting, Lorraine said, attempting to regain control of the interview. All I'm saying is that we should be able to examine these claims critically without being shouted down by the feminist mob. Feminist mob, Helen repeated. And now there was something dangerous in her tone. Is that what you think I am, Lorraine? Part of some mob, because I believe women deserve to be treated with basic human decency. Lorraine's desperation was becoming obvious to everyone watching. She had clearly expected Helen to be a polite, agreeable guest who would engage in light banter about her projects. Instead, she had picked a fight with someone far more intelligent and principled than herself, and she was losing badly. Helen, please. I think we're getting off track here. This was supposed to be about your new film project, and instead we're having this heavy political debate that I'm sure our viewers don't want to. Don't you dare, Helen interrupted, her voice cutting like ice. Don't you dare try to minimize what you've said by calling it politics. You have spent the last 15 minutes dismissing women's experiences, suggesting that discrimination doesn't exist, and implying that assault victims are liars seeking attention. These aren't political positions, Lorraine. They're moral failures. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but Helen wasn't finished. You sit here in your comfortable chair with your successful career, and you have the audacity to tell other women that their struggles aren't real. You dismiss their pain, minimize their experiences, and suggest they're motivated by greed or attention-seeking rather than a desire for justice. Now, wait just a minute, Lorraine tried to interject, but Helen's voice rose over hers. I have been in this industry for over 40 years, Lorraine. I have seen talented women passed over, heard them degraded and objectified, watched them leave promising careers because the environment became unbearable. And you want to sit here and tell me that's all in their heads? Lorraine was now clearly panicking, realizing that the interview had spiraled completely out of her control. Helen, I understand you're passionate about this, but surely we can disagree without. Without what? Without me pointing out that your views are harmful and backwards. Helen's eyes blazed with righteous anger. You asked me here to discuss a film about women's experiences, and when I tried to do that with dignity and respect, you turned it into an attack on every woman who has ever faced discrimination or abuse. I was just trying to present a balanced perspective, Lorraine said weakly. Balanced? Helen stood up abruptly, the sudden movement causing the cameras to quickly adjust their angles. There is no balance between truth and lies, Lorraine. There is no middle ground between supporting victims and blaming them for their own suffering. The sight of Helen Mirren standing on the bright morning show set, fury and moral authority radiating from her, was unlike anything British television had ever seen. Lorraine remained seated, looking suddenly very small and very alone on her orange sofa. You know what the most tragic part of this is? Helen continued, her voice now steady, but still carrying tremendous emotional weight. Women who are watching this, women who have been harassed or assaulted or discriminated against, they're hearing you tell them that their experiences don't matter. They're hearing a successful woman in media tell them they're probably lying or exaggerating or seeking attention. That's not what I meant, Lorraine said desperately. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. It's exactly what you meant, Helen replied with devastating precision. And it's exactly what you said. You cannot walk back words like that, Lorraine. You cannot unsay the things you've said in the last 20 minutes. Helen began removing her microphone with deliberate, controlled movements. The simple actions somehow carried more dramatic weight than any grand gesture could have achieved. I came here to talk about a project I care deeply about, she said, her voice now returning to its normal volume, but losing none of its intensity. A project about giving voice to women who have been silenced and marginalized. Instead, I find myself sitting across from someone who represents everything that project is fighting against. Lorraine made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Helen, please, can we just take a moment to? No. The word was final. Absolute. Helen straightened to her full height, and even in the bright, cheerful studio setting, she commanded the space like a queen addressing her subjects. I will not sit here and legitimize your views by continuing to engage with them. I will not pretend that there are two valid sides to the question of whether women deserve basic respect and dignity. She placed the microphone carefully on the coffee table between them, the small gesture somehow more powerful than if she had thrown it down in anger. This conversation is over, Lorraine. And frankly, after what I've heard today, I question whether you should be given a platform to spread these views to anyone, let alone millions of viewers every morning. With that, Helen Mirren walked off the set with the same grace and dignity she had brought to every role in her legendary career. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the studio doors, leaving Lorraine Kelly alone on her sofa, faced with the wreckage of what should have been a simple promotional interview. The silence stretched on for several more seconds before someone finally called cut. But by then, the damage was done. In 37 seconds of pure arrogance and ignorance, Lorraine Kelly had not only destroyed her own credibility, but had given Helen Mirren the opportunity to deliver one of the most powerful and principled performances of her career.